we've had a lot of questions on social media about the 7-day carb test. Can you give some context around that test and why you recommend that in Wired to Eat?
Yeah, the recent research in personalized nutrition paints a pretty interesting picture that people respond dramatically different to different amounts and types of carbohydrate. And this has been kind of a tough pill for me to swallow because I'm definitely steeped in this low carb deal. I love ketogenic diets, but the research is very compelling, and even our little dabbling in N equals 1 experimentation, the stuff that you've done, the things that like Eva Twardokins and Michael Rutherford has done, we've seen massive differences just from one person eating lentils like myself and Eva. I had a completely beautiful blood glucose response, and hers was through the roof. And then, we had a similar deal with like the white rice, made me look effectively diabetic. But then you and Eva, it was kind of a not that big of a deal for you. So the 7-day carb test is a way of transitioning out of these 30-day resets, whether it's Whole30, the recommendation I make in my book, other resets. And then we want to look at this carbohydrate story in a really granular fashion. Like, are the choices that we're making good? And is there more latitude that we could play around with? And so we ask that question, get in, experiment, and then we get some really quantifiable data. And a really important point to make with it, too, is we have these objective measures of blood sugar specifically, but then a lot of subjective tracking. How do you feel between meals? Do you get hungry? Are you foggy-headed? And you experience some of that, too. Even though your blood sugar responses were pretty darn good overall, definitely much better than mine, I think that the amount that you were eating was enough that you're like, I probably wouldn't eat that much under normal circumstances. Right. So that's
especially in the absence of protein,
protein
or
and fat and everything else. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
What do you think most people are going to learn? What do you think that most people are going to find out when they do this test?
I don't know if I could say a most people, because it depends. Like, has somebody been experimenting a lot? And if they have, then I think they're going to just kind of reconfirm what they've always suspected. Like, again, for myself, because I'm neurotic about this stuff a little bit, I've always known that white rice and white potatoes just don't work that well with me. I played with it. I was told that they're safe starches. You need to be a good paleo kid and eat that stuff. And I tried, and it just didn't work that well. But then evil legumes like lentils and even some kidney beans, I do pretty well with those. And I've done some gut restoration such that like the fermentable carbohydrates, the FODMAPs that are in those foods no longer give me problems. So, there's a process that's involved with that. If somebody is brand new to fiddling with their nutrition, it's liable to be a huge revelation for these folks, because they really, they maybe have been running through a fog their whole life. And then this is the first time that they really feel pretty good, particularly if they've done a reset. But then again, they may notice that there are some things like dairy for some people ends up causing a really high blood glucose response, not just the insulin response, but a blood glucose response. And that may be because they have an immunogenic response to that food. So, I would be hard pressed to say that there's going to be a singular or a common thing that folks are going to discover. I do think that folks will be surprised by the amount of variety and how some of it really follows the standard idea that the more carbohydrates you eat, the higher the blood glucose goes. And then in other situations, it may be a little bit different.
Great. We did have a question on Facebook or Instagram, I can't remember which, and she said, I can see that this could be revealing for those who look like they are metabolically healthy, but why would I, an overweight perimenopausal woman with known blood sugar issues, want to bother with this?
It's a great question, and you wouldn't. We would want to do a 30-day reset first, at a minimum. And even within that context of the 30-day reset, and I talk about this in Wired to Eat pretty extensively, and I start folks off with a modest amount of carbohydrate as a recommendation. It's somewhere between 75 and 150 grams of carbs, depending on how large the person is per day, not per meal, per day. And we do some screening, some triage to try to figure out where they are on the insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance spectrum. Then we drop them in and we do the 30-day reset. And hopefully at the end of that, we're looking and feeling better. Our blood glucose is more normalized. And then we get in and maybe play around with this stuff. But if we're still in a spot where things like green beans and onions and maybe a half an apple is giving us problems, then the 7-day reset really isn't the appropriate. The 7-day carb test is not really the appropriate place to go. Other than I could say maybe you start off with a half or a third of the recommended carbohydrate, and then you can see if there's just some variability from food to food. But in general, we're wanting to apply this to folks that are, they've established a baseline. It seems like their gut health is restored, their insulin sensitivity is better restored. And even then, restoration is going to be really variable from person to person. Like, you still kick my ass on all that, You can eat way more carbs. You feel much better. You don't have lingering issues with it. And I could work out all day long and it would help a little bit, but you're just genetically, epigenetically something. You're at a spot where you can handle more carbs more frequently than I can.